Thank you so much for tuning into Growth Island again. So I've got a ton of questions about exercise because, well, we all want to be healthy, right? But we often have limited time. So what can we do to exercise in a minimal amount of time and still get good results? So I asked my really good friend, Boomer Anderson, who has the big podcast, Decoding Humans, and he's had over 100 people on the podcast. And he was like, I know who you need to talk to. You need to talk to Sten Stray-Gundersen, and I still said it wrong, even though he's half Norwegian, so I should be able to pronounce it.
So good.
I got Sten on today. He is doing his PhD in exercise physiology and also did his master in exercise science. So he's going deep on this stuff and actually looking into the research and not just the bro science, where you're like looking down in the gym like, yo, bro, what's up? Gotta do some more lifting. So I wanted to make sure I found someone that's actually into the science. So Sten, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. A pleasure to be here.
So you have been doing some research on how we can exercise in a smart way that doesn't damage us. And it's something that sounds kind of interesting and also kind of fun when you see it first. Can you say a few words on the short description on what is it?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is something that's called blood flow restriction. It has various names. Originally came out of Japan as formerly as known as Kaatsu, which in Japanese means additional pressure. It's essentially applying bands on your arms and legs, upper arms and legs, in order to restrict blood flow, which traditionally you would need to lift heavy weights to get these results, but you actually restrict your blood flow, perform lightweight exercises, and you get the same benefits as lifting heavy weights.
And how did you get into that?
So that's an interesting story. I got into it through my dad, actually. So my dad has actually been a researcher in exercise physiology realm for over 40 years now, and so he's kind of been a person that people go to when they have these interesting ideas. And he was approached by a group from Japan with kind of the first edition of BFR called Kaatsu. And that's kind of how it all began. Once it was in his hands, it quickly kind of went down to mine. I was actually playing soccer or football at the time for Dartmouth College, and looking to get an edge on the competition and get a little bit more out of my training. And so I started using it. Really, the first way I started finding out about it and buying into it was for my own performance. And this kind of inspired, a love for physiology and understanding the physiology associated with exercise that eventually got me into what I do now.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what's the underlying mechanism behind doing this, and why does it work? Because one of the things that people might be afraid of is like if you restrict blood, that doesn't sound too good just from someone that's not a layman.
Yeah, and to your point, when I first started about this, I was extremely skeptical. Even if it was coming from my dad, he was also very skeptical. But the proposed mechanism, and again, this hasn't all been worked out, so I just want to disclaimer out there. But the proposed mechanism is that what we're doing is restricting the venous outflow. So you really have two forms of blood flow, right? You have your oxygenated blood going through your arteries. It then gets used up by the muscles or other tissues within the capillaries. And then on your venous side of things, you have the desaturated or deoxygenated blood coming back to the heart to be pumped in the lungs and resaturated. So really what the basis of BFR is trying to impede the venous blood flow, venous side of things, really. And the reason why we're able to restrict the venous outflow and not affect the arterial inflow is due to the smooth muscle that's around the arteries. So in order to optimize blood flow to tissues, in order to get waste out of tissues, we actually, on our arteries, we have thick, smooth muscle that vasodilates and vasoconstricts depending on the demand from the muscle itself. With the veins, they have a very thin amount of smooth muscle, but it's nowhere near what's on the arteries. And so by placing a band around, an elastic band, technically, around the limb itself, we can restrict venous outflow, which does two things. It disrupts the normal circulation and impedes our ability to remove waste from the contracting muscle without interfering with the arterial inflow. And this is actually a little bit different than other pathways in the literature right now, where people are using adapted blood pressure cuffs in order to occlude a percentage of arterial inflow, go up to AOP or arterial occlusion pressure, back off, and then perform exercises at that given pressure. So there's kind of we can kind of bifurcate it into two distinct forms. But really, the one that I have studied extensively has been the sort of venous restriction, kind of the original BFR.
Hmm.
And that's all to say. So as you restrict that venous blood flow, your muscle gets more and more in trouble. And by that I mean it's building up metabolites in that area. It's using up the ATP, it's using up the glycogen, using up the creatine, and that process, you normally need a replenishment of blood very quickly and an actual excretion or blood flow to get the waste out in order to sustain that muscle contraction or that intensity. And so very quickly with light weights, you're able to stimulate a really high intensity, high load environment in your actual muscle that then stimulates adaptations that you want.
Got it. So the benefit of doing that, except that you don't have enough weights at your house.
Yeah, and so actually during this sort of quarantine with Corona, I have been solely doing home workouts using body weight, light dumbbells, elastic bands, and just really been having a very good experience with it. I've actually gained muscle, and which is surprising. Even researching this stuff, you really don't appreciate it until you start really doing it and you see this results in yourself, that you can really start to appreciate it. It's really quite something.
Yeah. So one of my really good friends is using it as well, and he needs to be careful on how much load he puts on his body. Mm-hmm. So is that one of the advantages as well? Like the more kilos you put on, the more pressure you also put on the body. Or
yeah. So in some ways, and I don't want to say that lifting weights is inherently dangerous, because it's not. And I think loading the joints, especially in a healthy person, is actually important. The nice thing about BFR is that we don't have to load the joints in order to reap the benefits of exercise. And so, for some people that can be their only form of exercise. For example, if you're want to be time efficient, if you want to have the minimal effective dose, right? You can do this and get the most out of it. For others, a combined approach where you're lifting a little bit or loading the tissues and loading the joints a little bit or maximally, and then kind of tailoring that and then adding a polishing BFR session on after. The third is when people can't use loads at all. Let's say they're rehabbing or they're getting a little bit older and they just can't have that strain on their joints and tissues. This is a great way to maintain fitness and maintain muscle mass in those later stages.
Got it. I heard it's good for traveling as well because it doesn't take up that much space.
Amazing. Yeah. And actually, this is one of the things, my airplane protocol, anytime I'm on a plane for more than 4 hours, I will put the bands on. I'll get a few weird looks, but I'll put the bands on my arms and legs and just walk up and down the aisle or do some calf raises or some bicep curls just to get the body moving and blood flowing. Because it's, perhaps ironically, this impediment of blood flow, the normal circulation, once you take the bands off, actually has this, what we call a hyperemic effect or increased blood flow effect. And because of that, you end up stimulating a lot of tissues. You feel better, feel more energized. You have a little bit of an endorphin release. So you just feel like you're on top of the world. And this is one of the things I recommend people who are giving presentations or going to meetings, just doing a short 2 to 3 minute BFR session before, just, cognitively you're sharper. You're ready to kind of attack whatever you need to go into.
Interesting. So one of the things, how hard do you have to tighten these stuff? Because my friend said that he had other friends try it as well. Mm-hmm. And not all of them felt it was that comfortable. He's like, but he's used to it. It also depends on whether you got really good bands or not, whether it hurts or not. So he had some cheap bands to start with, and then he got some more expensive bands that didn't hurt as much.
Yeah, so this is actually something to make sure we kind of tell the audiences. Not every BFR product is made the same, and some can be dangerous. So if you don't know what you're doing, I definitely advise looking into it and making sure you talk to somebody who's a professional before kind of embarking on using BFR. Having said that, there are very effective products out there, and obviously the higher end ones are going to be more comfortable and that sort of thing. Again, having said that, really the comfort comes from getting used to it a little bit. It's never going to be fully comfortable, but what's really nice about the B Strong bands that we sell is that they provide a barrel system which dissipates or displaces some of the tissue more evenly or over a larger area. And this allows it for it to be a little bit more comfortable while maintaining this level of venous restriction. Other bands are wide and rigid, which kind of impede some muscle when you're doing this, and it pinches in areas. And so, it doesn't have to be painful. It's not exactly the most comfortable either.
No. But so how hard do you tighten it? Is it like almost can't feel your arm, or like how does, and is it on your arms?
So that's one sign that it's on too tight. If you're having any nerve kind of stimulation, whether it's going numb or tingling, that's a sign that's probably a little bit too tight. What that is you're making that nerve, at least where the band is, somewhat ischemic or partially ischemic. Ischemic means no blood flow. So you're just reducing the blood flow in that area specifically. And we try to avoid that. Again, we're really, in a perfect world, we would just simply have a venous clamp on our veins exiting our limbs. And that would be it. But unfortunately, you can't do that. So we designed a band.
Yeah, makes sense. So
to answer your question a little bit, it's a wide range of variability in terms of tightness among different products. But what we do, we have a protocol where we have a fitting pressure, or rather just a fitting tightness. And we say, one finger can fit under it easily. It's difficult to fit two. And then we have a pneumatic pump that allows you to very accurately and precisely dictate the pressure. And with that, we send out information in essentially a manual and an app to help guide people in order to determine the proper pressures to use. What's really nice about Be Strong is that up to our highest pressure, we cannot occlude arterial inflow. And we've shown this several times. And really any major complications happen when you occlude arterial inflow, when you make the muscle ischemic and then perform muscle contractions. This is where you can get into trouble.
So the problem is actually if you tighten it too much.
Exactly.
So it's good to find a product that kind of makes sure that doesn't happen.
Exactly. And ideally, you want a product that has some kind of scale on it, so that you can look at your variation day to day.
Yeah. Does it mean that you can exercise in a short amount of time?
Yes.
In regards to doing the weights, or how does that work? So let's say, like, instead of taking 100 kilos in bench press, because I'm such a big guy, people always know. Do you do less sets, or how does it work?
Yeah. So, there's no one set protocol, right? No. But generally speaking, you don't want to have these on for more than 15 to 30 minutes. Partially just because your muscles are screaming, you're maximally being, exercised and things like that. So you don't want them on for much longer than that. And so really within that time, you can have a very, very intense workout. And so something that's become fairly popular among people who are kind of pressed for time are these Tabata or high intensity HIIT workouts, right? And essentially that's what we're trying to get with BFR without inducing as much load on your tissues. So we're still shooting for that Tabata type workout, high intensity workout, but the absolute load is low. And so you're not actually damaging the fibers, but you're still getting that huge, calorie burn. And then the other thing is those HIIT workouts in BFR stimulate something called EPOC, which is excessive post-oxygen consumption. And what that is, it essentially raises your resting metabolic rate in order to burn more calories while you're not exercising. So even just doing a 15 to 20 minute workout per day, that next 24 hours, you're going to be stimulating all these processes that lead to leaning out and building muscle.
Sounds pretty smart.
It's really something. It's hacking the systems that normally adapt to exercise. And this, we know as humans, exercise is such a critical component of health, and it's such a regulatory component of health. There's so many, downstream mechanisms that are affected positively from exercise in general. This is simply a way to hack into that physiology and get the most out of it.
Yeah. So because there's so many things in the biohacking world that makes a huge difference. And I'm always curious, especially when there's more science coming out, what's keeping it back from getting out to more people? What do you think is one of the things that is keeping this from being more known to the general public? Is it because it's a new approach, which I don't think is a new, but it might just be new in regards to actually doing more research on it, or what's kind of been keeping it back?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I'm going to attempt at the answer, but it doesn't mean I'm right by any means. I think part of it is it has been around for quite a while, by the way. So in Japan, this is actually a pretty standard practice, and they've been doing it. The research there is 30, 40 years old. So they've known about it for quite a while. It's just making its way into Europe and kind of the Western culture here in the States as well. But I think one of the big impediments is people still don't really understand it. It's one of those things where, and I experience this too. When you're very skeptical for things like this. I think that tide is kind of turning, especially with more and more biohacking gaining credibility. I think that people are more and more buying into this. But I think it's really about people knowing that it's safe. Another concern is, well, I'm restricting blood flow, and I don't really know about what that means physiologically, so maybe I'll stay away from it and just stick to my normal thing. The other thing is, people, and rightly so, tend to believe in more traditional forms of exercise. And so it's always, it's best to go on the path well trodden, than to try to like a new path. So I think right now we're going through the process of trotting that new path. And I think once we kind of go through that and explain the safety aspects and the potential benefits, which are just huge, I think it'll start gaining more and more. And actually, over the past 3 years, I've seen it just really, really increase in popularity and just among everyone that I talk to.
What about people that have heart issues?
Yeah, so that's usually a really common question that comes up. And so by heart issues, there could be a myriad of things. So I don't want to, blanket statement like that. But really, the only absolute contraindication to using elastic pneumatic VFR, which so I can't speak for any other products, but B Strong specifically, is the phenotype for sickle cell anemia. It's something where your cells, especially when exposed to high levels of hypoxia, actually become irregular in shape, and this can do damage to your tissues and blood vessels. So that's really the only absolute contraindication. But everything else, as far as someone has been cleared to exercise, they should be able to perform a blood flow restriction workout. Again, as long as we're not occluding arterial inflow, it's relatively safe as long as you're placing the bands correctly and using the protocols that we set out.
Yeah. So it sounds like the placement of the band and not making it too tight, that's essential. And that's also what you got to be really careful then if you go on Amazon and buy some product, or if you just find some stuff and try and tighten your arms and be like, this is a way of doing your blood flow restriction training. Right.
I wouldn't advise that.
No.
Again, I wouldn't advise experimenting on yourself. Leave that to me. And just kind of follow the research and see what the research is saying. If you are trying this at home, be sure to place it high up on the arm, as high as it goes. I like to go right where the bicep meets the shoulder, right here in that groove, and then right where the glute meets the hamstring on the legs. Okay. So essentially, as high up on the limb as possible, and those two places tend to be the most comfortable as well.
Yeah.
And again, so you should be getting a little bit of discoloration in your arms and your legs, but it should not be numb or tingling, and it should not be inherently painful before you start working out.
Yeah. And you could also go for a run with this, right?
Yes. And actually, that's one of the things that particularly the B Strong bands are really nice for, because they're made for kind of practical exercises like that. So you can run with these on. And one of the things that's more recent in the literature is the aerobic benefits from blood flow restriction. So we tend to think of, and most of the research has focused on the resistance exercise or the strength benefits, where we've seen increases in strength and muscle hypertrophy or muscle size. And now there's been a focus on the aerobic component, and something that happens when you aerobically train yourself, particularly interval training. Well, a bunch of things happen, but one of the things that happens is you stimulate a bigger heart by reducing venous return. So venous return is how much blood is coming back to the heart at any one time. Because you're artificially or mechanically impeding that ability to return that blood to your heart, you're basically telling your body that the heart's not big enough. You don't have enough blood to go around, and you need to adapt to that. So you increase your blood volume, or how much total volume of blood that you have in your whole body. And over time, you stimulate changes in heart muscle and heart shape as well. Now, these are normal adaptations to aerobic training and things like that. But you get a huge anabolic response as well when you use BFR in conjunction with that.
And should you use it every single day, or is it something you do like 2 times a week or 3 times a week, and then you do normal exercises without?
Yeah. So I would say it's totally up to the individual. With any form of new exercise, I would always start out slow. So I would stick to 2 to 3 times a week. But especially right now, for example, I make sure to get a 15-minute workout in every day, and then I'll go do an activity on top of that if that's what the day calls for. So it's kind of the non-negotiable for the day for me. Make sure you get the biohack in, and then from there you can perform your sports. However, if you are looking to get into sort of a training program with this, I would recommend using it to polish off your normal training. So let's say you're training 3 times a week, traditional lifting, that kind of thing. Go into the gym, do about 75% of what you would normally do. Stop it right there, put the bands on, and work those same muscle groups using the similar exercises, but using a Be Strong BFR protocol. So 3 sets of 30 or 1 set of 30 followed by 3 sets of 15 of that given exercise. And with that, what you're doing is you're not taking away anything from actual loading and loading the joints and things like that. So if your goal is to be a weightlifter, you need to weightlift. If your goal is to be a football star, you need to play football. So there's a sport specific aspect to all this, and it needs to be happening at the loads that you're going to be dealing with. But the way that BFR works is a nice tool to augment the normal adaptations that you get from exercise. So, you can kind of think of a normal training stimulus causing a catabolic or breaking down of tissues, followed by an anabolic building up of those tissues. What BFR kind of does is, because we're using light weights, the actual damage to the muscle is very minimal. And so that cost of the exercise is no longer down here. It's more right around here, but we still get that same anabolic effect. So chronically, that has major implications for your recovery and your ability to perform the next day and the next day and the next day. And
so that in theory means that you could work out a bit more.
Exactly. And actually, but because the absolute loads that you're experiencing, the absolute time that you're actually exercising, it ends up being less. But you can increase the frequency at which you train to get better and better.
Yeah. That's pretty fascinating. I saw this interview with Joe Rogan, and I don't remember the guest he had in. I think it was someone within martial art. And they discussed whether you should exercise until like you couldn't do anything else more, right?
Yeah.
No pain, no gain.
Training to failure.
He was like, that's absolutely bullshit, because if you don't like totally damage yourself, you can work out the next day as well, and the next day, and just do less pull-ups and push-ups and so on.
Right.
I think that was pretty interesting, and I guess this is also supporting that you can do more exercise and then get more reps in over the long term.
Right. It's a really interesting topic, and this is often debated amongst exercise physiologists and people kind of in this field. Whether to go high volume, low intensity, or high intensity, low volume. It really depends on the phase of training that you're in. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other. It really just depends on that given situation. But what's nice is in those times where you have really high intensity, where you are breaking down the muscle because you are trying to restructure things, right? Adding in a little BFR to that helps augment that anabolic response. So you're going to recover better, even though you're still breaking down tissues. You're adding this in to recover. Or if you're on a really high volume, low intensity sort of thing, you can add a little bit more volume, but the absolute intensity is still lowered. And it's really nice to be able to, especially in the training world, be able to titrate this as a tool to get the most out of what you want. And so that kind of gets into the minutia of training. But for the average individual, for the executive, the one who's kind of wants the minimally effective dose, this is a great standalone tool as well.
Yeah. What would you recommend for someone that's like, I'm busy, I got kids, I don't got much sleep, I know I should get more sleep, I know I should exercise more, I'm trying to eat healthy, I can get in like 3 times, half an hour to an hour. Would that be a mix of these kind of bands? Would it be like once these kind of bands would actually be going for a run instead, or like what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, quite honestly, once you start using these, it becomes, at least for me, personally speaking, it becomes the preferred way of exercising because it's so efficient and just effective. And so, again, do what you want to do, right? Do what makes you feel good. If there's a certain type of training that you enjoy, do that. But if you're you only have a limited amount of time in the day, you can get a very effective workout in 20 minutes. And so if they only have 3 hours a week to devote to to working out, I would spread that over 5 days, 6 days, a few 15, 20-minute workouts. And before you know it, you're maximally stimulating the anabolic response and really, really benefiting from that exercise. So yeah, what that protocol would look like, body weight exercises. So think push-ups. For those a little bit stronger out there, you can try pull-ups. Again, we want to shoot for relatively low weight to be able to kind of not get sore for the next round of things. But dumbbell exercises, elastic band exercises, core workouts. There's the list is endless in terms of possible exercises you can do in a very short time.
Hmm. And so I know one of the guys that are working with the 3X bar in Denmark. And there's this really known YouTube video with a German bodybuilder, so to say, trainer, who is ripping it apart. But there's a lot of the things in that YouTube video that are not correct. So he's often having to explain why that's not correct. Right. If someone doesn't like this approach, and you start Googling it and finding, or you put in critique, what would be some of the common critiques and some of the common misunderstandings that people would be reading and being like, well, I just heard about this Sten guy, he seemed pretty nice, but this other guy is saying that this doesn't work at all.
Yeah, so we get this a lot, having kind of been in the blood flow restriction world for a while. I've heard about just about every critique. I'm open to others, by the way, but so something that often comes up is, does it really make you strong? How can you lift light weights and still get the strength benefits? Because something that's maybe not super well known is, any increases in strength from any training program are really coming from neurological or neuromuscular adaptations in the first 4 weeks of training. It's not really until 5th or 6th week where you start actually putting on muscle, right? Where we think of actually, most people think of hypertrophy, putting on muscle size or toning up, right? Those things come from neurological strength. And so the question is, okay, great. It can make the muscle bigger by stimulating these adaptations, but can it really make it stronger? And again, at first, very skeptical, but the research has shown time and time again that this is a reality. I'll bring, actually, this is a good point to share my screen and share the study with you. If you allow me to do that.
I will see if I can make you a host.
Okay. Perfect. Yep. Okay, so here we have a study from 2000 by Takarada et al. And I won't bore you with all the details of the study, but essentially what we're looking at here on the y-axis is elbow flexion torque, or essentially strength assessment of the bicep curl. Okay, and this is at a range of velocities and a range of actual values for that torque. This bottom line is before training, and this top line is after training. And each panel is referring to the high intensity or traditional weightlifting, low intensity without any blood flow restriction or occlusion, low intensity with occlusion, so with blood flow restriction, and a completely untrained, sedentary group. What we find is that the high intensity increased its strength and torque at each velocity that we see here, and these are all significant improvements. This is what we would expect from a traditional weightlifting exercise. This was with really light weights without any blood flow restriction, and as you can see, there's no increases. There's one significant increase here at 5 RPM, likely because this is how they were training with these light weights, probably at that velocity. That's where we see increases. The main takeaway here, though, is in this panel B, where it's the same weight, it's the same low intensity, light weights, but we have BFR bands on, and we see the same increases in strength that we saw with the high intensity group.
It looks very similar, the two graphs.
It's almost exactly the same. Yeah, there was no significant, this might be a significant difference. This might be a significant difference from here, but essentially the same increases in strength. So this right here alone shows, and again, you don't want to take any one study as the sole source, but I would encourage others to take a look at this study and others that have shown again that we do see increases in strength. So that's one of the critiques that we often get. Having said that, it is good to load every now and again to kind of test yourself. So, if you are just purely using BFR, occasionally go into the gym and see how you're improving or not. And you can make subtle adjustments there. Another common kind of concern comes from safety. Is this going to give me DVTs? Is it going to give me rhabdomyolysis? And really, to answer that, it depends on the BFR product that you get. So there's risk associated with everything. Be Strong has really tried to minimize that risk, and others that have really minimized that risk and set up protocols to make sure that we're doing things safely. The ones on the internet for $15-$20 don't have that really in place. And if you know what you're doing, they can be somewhat effective, but to the average individual, it's really ill advised to use those to try to get those gains. So one of the things, again, so DVTs, what really needs to happen is something called Virchow's triad. So 3 things need to happen for there to be a blood clot that gets dislodged and causes some kind of embolism or DVT.
And DVT, just translating that.
Sorry, deep vein thrombosis. And so you have to have endothelial damage, which usually that occurs in surgery where a surgeon actually slices a blood vessel. But this can also occur from something called reperfusion injury. Basically, when tissue is ischemic, it's building up a lot of oxidative stress during that time, and then you get a rush of inflow of blood, and that blood flow mixes with all those oxides and creates even more oxidative damage. So we can get endothelial damage that way. And then we also need stasis of blood flow. When we don't occlude arterial inflow, we don't get stasis. So that we don't have to worry about that. If you are occluding a percentage of arterial inflow, you may get stasis. And that's one of the reasons why there are set protocols to make sure that we are occluding safely, if that's what you're going to do. The third is just hypercoagulability, which is really just a genetic, you're genetically predisposed to have that. And so, 2 out of those 3 things we can control with blood flow restriction. And with the Be Strong product, we essentially account for both of those. So that's another thing. And actually, it's interesting. In Japan, this is actually used to treat people who are at risk of DVTs. Part of the reason is exercise in itself, like I mentioned before, is very regulatory. And so, it tends to fix areas that are kind of undergoing stress or dysfunctional. Exercise is a really powerful tool to do that. And again, BFR is not coming up with anything extraneous. It's really, again, hacking into the existing physiology to try to get the most out of it.
Got it. So if someone is listening and be like, okay, I gotta test this out, but I need to learn some more. Where would you send people? Where can they read a bit more on it, or just be like, okay, I want to get started?
Yeah. So if you're versed in science, I would lead you to some academic papers. Literally go on PubMed or whatever your article search database is, and type in blood flow restriction and resistance training or exercise training. But really, another great place is to go to Be Strong Training or bestrong.training.com. We have a really good synopsis that we've written up on sort of the proposed mechanism, some benefits, safety aspects, and things like that. So please go check that out. And if you are interested, please go ahead and purchase one. We'll be giving out a discount for 10% off with the code STEN10, STEN, and then the number 10.
Make sure to include that in the show notes as well.
Okay, we'll do. Or it sounds good. So we'll have that. And really, if you want to know more information, check out the website and kind of do some homework on BFR. But like I said, BFR I think has a power to be a really revolutionary tool, and just has I think is going to exponentially increase in popularity coming very, very soon.
I am looking very much forward to seeing how it looks in 3 years' time. If it's going to gain some of the same popularity as the 3Xs right now, if it's going to be, it sounds very promising. Boomer was very excited about it, and my friend Thomas, who is one of the guys I asked for advice, was also super excited about it.
Excellent. Yeah. So actually, for all you guys out there, I should mention this. I was remiss not mentioning it to Boomer last time we talked. So one of the nice benefits of this is a major bump in a molecule called nitric oxide. So I'm sure many of you out there have heard of nitric oxide. These studies are coming out talking about the intake of nitrates, which are NO-3, gets converted into nitrite, NO-2, and then it gets into the bioactive version called NO, right? Nitric oxide. It's a major vasodilator in the body. And one of the things that blood flow restriction does is it stimulates the release of nitric oxide. So whether that's increasing its bioavailability or our sensitization to nitric oxide, it is increasing the ability to engorge blood vessels. And something that a lot of people benefit from exercise in general is more libido and more sex drive. And so one of the proposed benefits of blood flow restriction in particular is an enhanced erectile function in response to this blood flow restriction. And so
I think that should be the opening.
Yeah, that's what they usually say. So it really is something I if nothing else, go out and try it just for that, and see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Super. Sten, what are some of your habits apart from doing this?
Yeah, so I grew up playing soccer, so football. Sorry, I know I'm in the States here. I'm so Texan now. Grew up playing football, and so I love to do that. I'm a big mountain biker. I go mountain biking. I'm very active. I've lived a lot of different places. Some of the time in Park City, Utah. So love the mountains. Love skiing. Go out here in Austin. We have a lake where we go paddleboarding, and so just love to live healthy and get into the research. Love studying physiology, and so that's kind of my life. Try to live it out and really be what I'm studying.
Sounds fantastic. I'm finding a lot of biohackers are actually ending up not living it as much as they are preaching it or posting on Instagram and so on, and kind of forgetting to just as you said, go to the mountain, enjoy life.
Yeah. I've really gotten into biohacking in general, like whether it's meditation, just really being mindful of surroundings. Also just nutrition intake, just being very cognizant of what you're putting into your body has such a profound impact on your microbiome, which then has downstream effects on your hormones. And so all of these aspects play into one another, and the ability to use BFR to really kind of augment all of these processes has really been my kind of golden ticket to be able to stay healthy and have vitality in my life. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about you?
So I feel like I'm a ghost on the internet a little bit.
You're hard to find, at least.
I'm hard to find. But I have had a couple articles come out recently looking at the safety aspects of blood flow restriction. So you can look up some of those studies. Walking with blood flow restriction is one of them, and blood flow restriction in combination with yoga is another one. I'm not too profound or big into social media or anything like that. I think it can be really, really beneficial, and I think there's a lot of good going out there. But so maybe it's something for me to get into. But
can also steal a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to focus on other things, but no. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but they can.
I'll try and find a link for your academic page, or where we can see studies coming out. You have a LinkedIn as well that I'll link to.
I do have LinkedIn, yeah, so you can find me there. Please reach out. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, reach out if you have questions. Let me know.
Great. Before we round off, any last advice? Can be anything about life to be happy, healthy, meaningful life that you found that works for you, or that you would like to live, but you're still working on. Yeah,
well, so a couple things. I really appreciate the holistic approach to everything. So I think everything is so interconnected in terms of how you live your life. So and I think fundamentally the biggest thing is just being true to your word. If you're true to your word and you're true to yourself, all the things that you tell yourself that you're going to do, you will do. Right. Having said that, we're not perfect, and everybody struggles with sticking to plans and being disciplined, and so that's something I constantly work on. But again, I think just speaking truth is a huge advice, and kind of extends into almost every facet of your life. So speak the truth and execute on your own words.
Perfect. Sten, how did I say it right?
Sten, you got it.
Sten, all right. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your knowledge.